The fluorescent lights in Blumenthorn flickered at 5:47 a.m., casting uneven shadows across the cramped workspace behind the counter. Violet Hayes moved through the semi-darkness with practiced efficiency, her worn sneakers barely making a sound against the scuffed linoleum floor. The flower shop smelled like earth and green stems and something faintly sweet she could never quite name. A combination that had become more familiar to her than any perfume. She pulled 3 white roses from the industrial refrigerator, their petals still tight with cold. Her fingers worked automatically, stripping thorns and cutting stems at precise 45-degree angles. Outside, the street remained empty except for a stray cat picking through trash near the Korean grocery across the road. This was her favorite time of day. The 2 hours before the shop officially opened at 8, when the world stayed quiet and she could pretend the stack of bills under the register didn't exist. Violet arranged the roses in a simple glass vase, then stepped back to examine her work. Not bad, not spectacular either, but she'd learned years ago that spectacular didn't pay rent. Simple and affordable did. Sometimes. Her stomach growled, reminding her she'd skipped dinner again last night. The package of instant noodles sitting in her studio apartment upstairs had been there for 3 days, waiting for a moment desperate enough to justify eating them. She was getting close. The bell above the door would have jingled if anyone had entered, but no one ever came this early. Violet moved to the small desk wedged between the refrigerator and the back wall, where her ancient laptop sat surrounded by order forms and payment notices printed on paper she'd reused 3 times. She opened the banking app and watched the numbers load with the kind of dread that had become routine. $243. Rent was $800, due in 3 days. She closed the laptop before the anxiety could fully settle in her chest. There had to be a solution. There was always a solution. She just hadn't found it yet. Violet returned to the flowers, pulling out daisies and baby's breath for a birthday arrangement someone had ordered 2 days ago. $15. Every bit helped. Her hands moved through the familiar motions while her mind calculated impossible math, trying to stretch $243 across $800 in rent, $70 in utilities, and the fact that she hadn't eaten a real meal in 5 days. The daisies looked cheerful in their container, white and yellow, and completely unaware that the person arranging them was 3 days from eviction. She'd found the eviction notice yesterday, taped to her apartment door in an envelope marked "Final." The paper had been pink. She didn't know why that detail stuck with her, but it did. Pink, like something that should have announced a party instead of homelessness. Violet pushed the thought away and focused on the baby's breath, filling in the spaces between daisies with the delicate white clusters. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. Probably another automated reminder about a bill she already knew she couldn't pay. The arrangement came together slowly, each stem placed with the kind of care that came from having nothing else to give. When she finished, she set it in the display cooler near the front window and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. It was pretty. Simple, but pretty. Her reflection stared back from the cooler's glass door. Auburn hair falling out of its bun, dark circles under green eyes that used to be brighter, skin too pale from too many hours indoors and too few proper meals. She looked exactly like what she was. 26 years old and barely surviving. The thought came automatically, the one that always did during quiet moments. You're alone. You've always been alone. Violet had been 8 years old the last time she remembered having family. The memories were fragments now, pieces of a puzzle she'd stopped trying to assemble years ago. A foster care facility with green walls, someone holding her hand, a promise she couldn't quite remember. Then nothing but a series of temporary homes and people who looked through her instead of at her. She'd aged out of the system at 18 with $200, a garbage bag of clothes, and the kind of loneliness that felt like a physical weight. 8 years later, the loneliness hadn't gotten lighter. She'd just gotten better at carrying it. The flowers helped. They always helped. Violet talked to them sometimes, usually during the early morning hours when no one else was around to hear. Not full conversations, just small observations. You're blooming nicely. Your petals are soft today. Thank you for being here. It was pathetic, probably, but the flowers never judged, and they were the closest thing to companionship she had. Her phone buzzed again. This time she checked it. Past due notice. Electric bill. Disconnect scheduled for. She didn't read the rest, just shoved the phone back in her pocket and grabbed another bundle of flowers from the cooler. Carnations this time, pink and red and white. Someone had ordered them for an anniversary. 40 years of marriage, the order form said. 40 years of not being alone. Violet tried to imagine what that felt like and came up empty. She worked through the next hour in silence, creating arrangements from orders that would barely cover the cost of the flowers themselves. By 7:30, the display case was full of carefully constructed bouquets, each one representing a moment in someone else's life she'd never experience herself. Birthdays, anniversaries, apologies, celebrations. She was arranging other people's happiness while her own crumbled around her. The thought was bitter enough that she felt guilty for thinking it. Violet wiped her hands on her jeans and moved to unlock the front door. The metal deadbolt stuck like it always did, requiring 3 sharp tugs before it released. She made a mental note to ask Mr. Peterson about fixing it, then remembered she couldn't afford to ask Mr. Peterson for anything. The elderly man owned the building and had given her a chance when no one else would. 2 years ago, when she'd walked in asking about the help wanted sign, he'd looked at her with kind eyes and said, "You know anything about flowers?" She'd lied and said yes. Then spent the next 3 months learning everything she could from YouTube videos and library books, terrified he'd realize his mistake and fire her. He never did. A year later, when his arthritis got too bad to manage the daily work, he'd offered her the shop to run independently. Same rent, same terms, but the freedom to make it hers. She'd cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes after he left. Now the shop was the only thing standing between her and complete destitution, and she was about to lose it anyway. Violet flipped the sign from closed to open and returned to the counter. The morning light filtered through the front windows, illuminating dust particles floating in the air. She watched them drift for a moment, suspended and directionless. Maybe today would be different. The thought was automatic, a mantra she'd repeated every morning for as long as she could remember. Maybe today someone would place a large order. Maybe today a solution would present itself. Maybe today she'd stop feeling like she was drowning. She didn't believe it anymore, but she thought it anyway because what else was there? The morning passed in its usual quiet rhythm until 10:23, when the bell above the door chimed with enough force to make Violet look up from the ledger she'd been pretending to balance. A woman strode in, like she owned not just the shop, but the entire block, her heels clicking against the floor with sharp, deliberate strikes. Violet recognized expensive when she saw it. Even if she couldn't afford it herself, the woman's designer handbag probably cost more than 3 months of rent. Her platinum blonde hair was cut in a severe bob that somehow made her look both polished and cruel, and her red lipstick matched her manicured nails exactly. Everything about her screamed money and the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no. Violet set down her pen and forced a professional smile. "Can I help you find something?" The woman didn't return the smile. She stopped at the counter and looked around the shop with the expression of someone who'd just discovered mold in their bathroom. "I need an arrangement for a party tonight." Violet pulled out an order form, already reaching for her pen. "Of course. What kind of arrangement were you thinking?" "Something impressive." The woman waved her hand dismissively. "Roses, lilies, orchids. I don't care. Just make it look expensive. My guests need to know I didn't shop at some roadside stand." Violet kept her smile in place through sheer force of will. "I can definitely create something beautiful for you." "When's the party?" "Tonight." The woman checked her phone, clearly bored with the conversation already. "Starts at 7. The smile faltered. "Tonight? As in today?" "Obviously." The woman finally looked directly at Violet, her cold blue eyes narrowing. "Is that a problem?" Violet chose her words carefully. "For an arrangement like you're describing, I typically need at least 3 days' notice. The flowers have to be ordered from my suppliers, and the design work alone takes— I don't care about your process." The woman's voice went sharp. "I need it today." "I understand, but it's physically not possible." Violet kept her tone gentle, professional. "I don't have those flowers in stock right now, but I could do something beautiful with what I have available. Or I could put a rush order through for pickup tomorrow morning." The woman leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the counter. "Do you know who my husband is?" Violet blinked at the non sequitur. "I'm sorry?" "Robert Westbrook." The woman said the name like it should mean something, like it should make Violet fall to her knees in apology. He owns half the commercial real estate in this city. One phone call from me, and he'll be lucky to get a job cleaning toilets. The threat landed exactly as intended, but Violet had spent too many years being pushed around by people who thought money made them untouchable. She straightened her spine and met the woman's eyes directly. "Ma'am, I'm very sorry, but threatening me doesn't change the fact that I don't have the flowers you want. I'm happy to work with what's available, or schedule something for tomorrow, but I can't do the impossible." The woman's face flushed an ugly shade of red that clashed with her lipstick. "You're refusing me?" "I'm explaining reality." Violet kept her voice steady even as her heart started to race. "I want to help you, but I need you to understand the limitations." She didn't see it coming. One moment the woman was standing across the counter. The next, Violet's head snapped to the side as a sharp crack echoed through the small shop. Pain exploded across her left cheek. Hot and immediate and shocking. Violet stumbled backward, her hip colliding with the desk behind her. A vase of tulips tipped over, water and flowers spilling across the floor in a cascade of red and yellow and broken glass. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Violet's hand came up to her burning cheek automatically, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. The woman stood on the other side of the counter, chest heaving, her hand still raised slightly. Then the shock wore off, replaced by something cold and solid in Violet's chest. She straightened slowly, glass crunching under her sneakers. Her cheek throbbed with each heartbeat, and she could taste blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. But she looked directly at the woman and kept her voice steady. "I still can't give you flowers I don't have, even if you hit me again." The woman's eyes widened slightly, like she hadn't expected resistance. Then her expression twisted into something ugly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I'm going to have this pathetic shop shut down. You'll be homeless by the end of the week." She turned and stormed toward the door, her heels clicking violently against the floor. The bell chimed again as she yanked the door open hard enough to make it bounce against the wall. "And just so you know," the woman added, turning back with a vicious smile, "that hand-me-down dump you're running? It's in one of my husband's buildings. Consider your lease terminated." The door slammed shut behind her, leaving Violet alone in the sudden silence. For a long moment she just stood there, one hand still pressed to her burning cheek, surrounded by broken glass and scattered tulips. The cold thing in her chest was cracking now, and she could feel something dangerously close to tears building behind her eyes. She wouldn't cry. She'd learned a long time ago that crying didn't fix anything. Instead, she knelt down carefully and started picking up the larger pieces of broken glass, placing them in her palm one by one. The tulips were ruined, their stems crushed, and petals already wilting. 2 days of grocery money destroyed. Her phone rang from the counter above, the sound too loud in the quiet shop. Violet ignored it and continued gathering glass shards, focusing on the simple, mechanical task. Pick up glass. Don't think. Pick up glass. Don't feel. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. Violet sighed and stood, dumping the glass into the trash bin before reaching for her phone. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her thumb hit the accept button. "Hello? Miss Hayes?" The voice was male, elderly, and familiar. "Mr. Peterson." "Oh, hi, Mr. Peterson." Violet tried to sound normal and knew she was failing. "Is everything okay?" "That's what I called to ask you, Dia." Rar. He sounded concerned. "I heard about what happened just now." Violet frowned, looking around the empty shop. "How did you—" "The building has security cameras on the street. I got a call from the property owner. He saw the incident through the feed." "Property owner?" Violet's confusion deepened. "I thought you owned the building?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I manage it, dear. Have for 15 years, but the actual owner is a private investor. He prefers to stay out of the day-to-day operations. I don't understand." Violet's free hand came up to touch her still throbbing cheek. Why would the owner care about a customer dispute? Mr. Peterson's voice carried something she couldn't quite identify. Concern, maybe, or nervousness. "Because that wasn't just a customer dispute, Miss Hayes. That was assault. And the owner takes these things very seriously. I'm fine, really." Violet tried to sound convincing. I'll just clean up and... He's on his way there now. Mr. Peterson spoke quickly, like he needed to get the words out before he lost his nerve. Should be there in about 20 minutes. He'll want to talk to you about what happened. Wait, what? Violet's heart started racing again for entirely different reasons. That's not necessary. I don't want to make a big deal out of... It's already done, dear. Mr. Peterson's tone went gentle. Just be honest with him. Answer his questions. He's intense, but he's fair. The line went dead before Violet could respond. She stood there holding her phone, trying to process the conversation. A property owner she'd never met was coming to talk to her about getting slapped by a customer. This day was getting stranger by the minute. Violet looked down at the mess still scattered across the floor, then at her reflection in the display cooler's glass. Her left cheek was already turning red. The clear outline of fingers visible against her pale skin. 20 minutes. She had 20 minutes to clean up, compose herself, and figure out how to explain to some mysterious property owner that she really didn't need his help, and please don't evict her for causing trouble. Violet grabbed the broom and started sweeping up the smaller glass fragments, her movements quick and mechanical. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, and somewhere across the city, 3 black SUVs were heading her direction. Violet had just finished sweeping when she heard the vehicles pull up outside. Not one car, but multiple, their engines cutting off in synchronized succession that made something cold slide down her spine. She looked through the front window and felt her breath catch. 3 black SUVs sat parked in front of the shop, the kind with tinted windows that probably cost more than she'd earn in 5 years. They looked like they belonged in a movie, not on her quiet street corner next to the Korean grocery and the laundromat with the broken sign. People on the sidewalk had stopped to stare. Mrs. Chen from across the street stood in her doorway, hands on her hips, watching with undisguised curiosity. The doors opened. 2 men in dark suits emerged from the first vehicle, their eyes scanning the street with the kind of alertness that made Violet think of police officers, or something less legal. They positioned themselves on either side of the shop's entrance like sentries. A third man stepped out from the middle SUV. Tall, athletic build, sandy brown hair, wearing business casual clothes that somehow looked tactical. He spoke briefly into a phone, then opened the rear passenger door. The man who emerged made everything else fade into background noise. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his charcoal suit in a way that suggested the expensive fabric was just barely containing something dangerous. His black hair was slicked back perfectly, not a strand out of place, and even from inside the shop, Violet could see the sharp line of his jaw and the scar that cut from his left eyebrow down to his cheekbone. He moved like someone who knew exactly how much space he occupied and expected everyone else to accommodate it. Violet's survival instincts, honed from years of navigating foster care and living alone in a city that didn't care if she disappeared, started screaming at her to run. This man was dangerous. Everything about him broadcast it, from the way he carried himself to the way the other men deferred to him with subtle shifts of their posture. But she was trapped behind the counter with nowhere to go. So she lifted her chin and tried to look like her heart wasn't hammering against her ribs. The door opened. The bell chimed, cheerful and completely inappropriate for the moment. He entered first, followed by the sandy-haired man. The 2 guards remained outside. The small flower shop suddenly felt impossibly cramped, like the walls had moved closer together to accommodate his presence. His eyes found her immediately. They were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they locked onto her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. She didn't. "Can I help you?" Her voice came out steadier than she expected. He didn't answer right away, just studied her with those unsettling gray eyes, his gaze moving from her face to the red mark on her cheek that had darkened in the 20 minutes since the slap. Something shifted in his expression, something cold and furious that appeared for just a second before being locked behind perfect control. "Who did this to you?" His voice was quiet, dangerously so. Violet blinked. "I'm sorry, are you from the building management? Because the customer already left, and I really don't think I own this building." He took a step closer, his focus never leaving her face. "I own this shop, and I asked you a question." The words hit her like cold water. "You own?" "But," Mr. Peterson said. "Mr. Peterson manages the property." The man's jaw tightened as he looked at her cheek again. "I'm the owner. Now answer me." Violet felt completely off balance, like the floor had tilted without warning. This man owned her shop? The place she'd worked for 2 years, the only stable thing in her entire life, belonged to this dangerous stranger who'd shown up with armed guards and vehicles that probably cost more than the building itself. "Look," she managed, wrapping her arms around herself defensively. "I don't want trouble. A customer got upset because I couldn't fulfill her order. She overreacted. I'll just forget it happened and, no." The single word cut through her explanation like a blade. "You won't, and neither will I." The sandy-haired man stepped forward, holding out a tablet. The owner took it without looking away from Violet, then glanced down at the screen. She watched his face as he viewed whatever was on it. Saw his expression go from controlled anger to something much darker. He turned the tablet around so she could see. Security footage, the timestamp reading 10:23, showing the interior of her shop. Up from an angle she hadn't known existed. She watched herself stumble backward, watched the vase fall, watched the woman storm out. Claudia Westbrook. His voice had gone even quieter, which somehow made it more threatening. Wife of Robert Westbrook. Violet's stomach dropped. The woman had been telling the truth about her husband, and based on this man's reaction, that name meant something significant. "I don't want any trouble," she repeated. Hearing the desperation creep into her voice. "Really, I'll just..." He moved closer to the counter, and she instinctively took a step back. He noticed, and something flickered across his face that might have been regret. Then he reached out slowly, deliberately, and she realized he was looking at her wrist, at the small, flower-shaped birthmark just above her pulse point. Violet had always been self-conscious about it. A port wine stain, the doctor at the free clinic had called it. Unusual shape, but harmless. She'd worn long sleeves for years trying to hide it, had only recently stopped caring enough to keep it covered. The man stared at it like he'd seen a ghost. "What's your full name?" The question came out rough, almost hoarse. She pulled her wrist back, confused and increasingly scared. "Violet Hayes." "Why?" He didn't answer. His hand came up to run through his perfectly styled hair, disrupting it for the first time. The sandy-haired man, whose name she still didn't know, was watching his boss with clear concern. "How old are you?" The question was so unexpected that she answered automatically. 26. "I don't understand what this has to. When's your birthday?" "March 14th. Violet's confusion was rapidly turning into fear. "But I really don't see what." He turned away abruptly, his hands still in his hair, his shoulders tight with tension. The sandy-haired man moved closer to him, speaking too quietly for her to hear. The owner shook his head, then turned back to face her. His expression had changed. The dangerous control was cracking, revealing something underneath that looked almost like pain. "Do you remember anything before foster care?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Violet's arms tightened around herself, her breathing suddenly shallow. "How do you know I was in foster care?" "Because I was there too." His voice had gone rough again, and she watched him struggle for control. "And I've been looking for you for 18 years. The shop went completely silent. Even the humming of the refrigerator seemed to fade away. Violet stood frozen behind the counter, her mind struggling to process words that didn't make sense. "What?" He took something from his pocket, a photograph, old and creased from being handled too many times. He held it out to her with a hand that wasn't quite steady. She took it automatically, looking down at two children standing in front of a building with green walls. A boy, maybe 10 years old, dark-haired and serious-faced. A little girl with auburn hair and green eyes, holding his hand. The girl had a flower-shaped birthmark on her wrist. Violet's vision blurred. She knew this photo. She had a copy once, years ago, before it had been lost in one of her many moves between foster homes. She'd thought it was gone forever. Her hand came up to her mouth. The boy in the photo had promised her something. She couldn't remember what, just that he'd held her hand and promised, and then they'd been separated, and she'd never seen him again. She looked up at the man standing across the counter, at his dark hair and gray eyes, and the way he was watching her like she might disappear if he blinked. The boy had been 8 years older than her, which would make him 34 now. "No," she whispered. "That's not Victor Hayes." He said the name like a confession. "Your brother." The photograph slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the counter. Violet gripped the edge to keep herself upright. her entire world tilting sideways. She'd spent 18 years believing she was alone. 18 years thinking she had no family, no one who remembered her or cared if she existed. "You're lying. I have documentation." His voice was gentler now, careful. "Birth certificates, foster care records. And I can have DNA results within 6 hours if you need proof." "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why now? Why here?" "Because I've been searching since the day they separated us." His control finally cracked completely, and she saw raw emotion flash across his face. "I bought this building 3 years ago because records showed you'd been placed in a foster home 2 blocks away when you were 12. I've owned every property in a 6-block radius, hoping you'd come back to the neighborhood. And when Mr. Peterson called last year saying he needed help with the shop, needed to hire someone, I told him to give the job to whoever needed it most." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You walked in 2 years ago asking about that help wanted sign. Mr. Peterson sent me your application. I saw your name, your birthday, and I knew. I've been watching over you ever since." Violet's mind spun. 2 years. He'd known for 2 years and never said anything? "You let me struggle." The accusation came out sharp and hurt. "I almost lost everything, and you just watched?" "I was trying to be sure." His jaw tightened. "Trying to find the right way to approach you. You have no idea how many times I stood outside this shop, trying to figure out how to tell you without terrifying you. You brought armed guards," she shot back. "How is this not terrifying?" "Because someone put their hands on you." His voice went cold again. "And that changes everything." Victor led her upstairs to an office she hadn't known existed. The door was hidden behind what she'd always thought was just a maintenance closet, revealing a narrow staircase that opened into a space directly above the shop. The room was small but expensively furnished, with a desk, leather chairs, and filing cabinets that looked like they cost more than her entire apartment. The sandy-haired man, who Victor had introduced as Owen, set a manila folder on the desk between them. Violet sat in one of the leather chairs, still feeling like she'd stumbled into someone else's life by mistake. Victor remained standing, his controlled exterior back in place, but fragile. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his hands kept flexing at his sides, like he wanted to reach for something, but didn't know what. Owen opened the folder. Birth certificates on top. She could see her own name and birth date, then Victor's, issued 8 years earlier. Same parents listed on both. Michael Hayes and Catherine Hayes, both deceased. "I don't remember them." Violet's voice came out small. "Our parents. I've tried, but I can't. You were 6 when they died." Victor's voice was carefully neutral. "Car accident, supposedly. I was 14, old enough to know it wasn't an accident, not old enough to prove it." She looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" He exchanged a glance with Owen, something that will make sense later. "For now, just know that after they died, we went into the system. They tried to keep us together initially, but I had behavioral problems." He said it without shame, like reciting facts. "Anger issues, fighting. I was too much for most homes to handle with a young child as well, so they separated us. 8 months after our parents died." His jaw tightened. "They told me it was temporary, that once I got my behavior under control, we'd be placed together again. I believed them." Violet stared at the documents, at proof of a life she couldn't remember. "But you never came back. Because I aged out of the system at 18 before they'd let us reunite. By then, you'd been moved 4 times. Different homes, different neighborhoods. I tried to find you, but the records were sealed. Privacy laws. I spent everything I had on lawyers who told me there was nothing they could do. So what changed?" She met his eyes. "How did you find me?" I stopped asking politely. His expression went hard. "I built something that gave me the resources and connections to access sealed records. It took years, but eventually I found the trail. Every placement, every move. By the time I tracked you to this neighborhood, you'd aged out too and disappeared. Hence buying the buildings." Owen spoke for the first time since they'd come upstairs, his voice matter-of-fact. "Every property within reasonable distance of your last known location. It was a long shot, but it worked." Violet's mind was reeling. This was insane. All of it. The brother she didn't remember, the 18-year search, the inexplicable amount of money. it would take to buy multiple buildings just to find one person. What exactly did you build? She asked the question carefully. What kind of resources are we talking about? Another glance between Victor and Owen, this one longer. Victor moved to the window, looking down at the street where the black SUVs still sat like predators at rest. I run a private security firm. His voice was measured, each word chosen with precision. High-level clients, discreet operations. It's lucrative enough that I can afford to make finding you my primary objective. It was a lie. Not a complete lie, maybe, but definitely not the whole truth. Violet had spent enough years reading people's expressions to know when she was being managed. Before she could call him on it, the door opened. Owen had left at some point without her noticing, and now he returned with someone small hiding behind his leg. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, with long black hair in careful braids and gray eyes that matched Victor's exactly. She wore a blue dress with leggings and light-up sneakers, and clutched a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Victor's entire demeanor transformed. The dangerous edge softened into something infinitely gentle as he knelt down to the child's level. "Hey, little star, I thought you were with Mrs. Patterson." The girl's hands moved in quick, fluid gestures, sign language. Violet had learned basic ASL years ago during a short-lived job at a community center, enough to recognize it even if she couldn't follow the rapid conversation. Victor signed back, then glanced at Violet. "She wants to meet you." He switched back to speaking aloud, probably for Violet's benefit. "Emma, this is Violet, the person I've been looking for." Emma stepped out from behind Owen, her eyes wide and assessing. She moved her hands again, slower this time. "She's asking if you're really her aunt." Victor's voice had gone rough again. Violet's heart stuttered. "Aunt?" She looked at Victor. "You have a daughter. Had a wife too." He stood, one hand resting on Emma's shoulder. Past tense. Emma's mother died 2 years ago. She hasn't spoken aloud since. The grief in his voice was carefully controlled but unmistakable. Violet looked at the little girl studying her with Victor's eyes and felt something crack open in her chest. This child had lost her mother. Victor had lost his wife. And they'd both been dealing with it, while he searched for a sister who didn't even know she existed. Emma moved forward cautiously, stopping just in front of Violet's chair. Her hands lifted again, and this time Violet caught enough to understand. "Can you hear me?" Violet slid out of the chair and knelt so they were at eye level. She signed back carefully, her rusty ASL probably clumsy but hopefully understandable. "Yes, I can hear you." Emma's face lit up like sunrise. She signed again, faster now, and Violet had to look to Victor for translation. "She says you have pretty hair." He almost smiled, "and she wants to know if you like flowers." "I love flowers." Violet signed along with her words. "I work with them every day." Emma's next question needed no translation. She pointed at Violet's cheek, at the mark that had deepened to a bruise, her expression concerned. "I'm okay," Violet assured her. "Just a misunderstanding with a customer." The gentleness vanished from Victor's face. "Not a misunderstanding, assault, and it's being handled tonight." Violet stood quickly. "Handled? What does that mean?" "It means Claudia Westbrook will apologize." Victor's voice went cold. "Publicly. I don't want violence because of me." She kept her voice low, aware of Emma watching them. "Please, just let it go." "No," the word was absolute. "You're my sister. She put her hands on you. There are consequences for that." The possessiveness in his voice should have scared her. Maybe it did a little. But there was something else underneath the fear. Something she couldn't quite name. The feeling of someone caring enough to be angry on her behalf. The novelty of not being alone. Emma tugged on Victor's sleeve, signing something that made his expression soften slightly. He sighed and nodded, then looked at Violet. "She's suggesting we table this discussion for now and focus on more important things, like whether you're hungry." "I haven't eaten since." Violet cut herself off, not wanting to admit how long it had actually been. Victor's eyes narrowed. "Since when?" "Yesterday morning." The lie came automatically. Owen made a noise that might have been skeptical. Victor pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. Within 30 seconds, he'd apparently ordered enough food for 6 people to be delivered to the office. Then he turned back to Violet, and his expression was serious again. "I need you to hear something. Really hear it." She waited, her arms wrapped around herself defensively. "You have a brother now. You have a niece. You have family. And I know this is overwhelming. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm asking you to consider something. What? Move into my house. Let me protect you. Let me make up for 18 years of not being there. The offer hung in the air between them, like something physical. Violet's first instinct was to refuse. This was too much, too fast. She didn't know this man, didn't know his world or what being part of his family would actually mean. But Emma was looking at her with hopeful gray eyes, and Victor was watching her like she might disappear if he blinked. And God, she was so tired of being alone. Your house, she repeated carefully. Where you live, 30 minutes outside the city. It's secure, private. You'd have your own space. For how long? As long as you want. Forever, if you'll let me. The word forever did something strange to her breathing. I don't even know you. Then get to know me. His voice dropped, became almost pleading. 3 weeks, trial basis. If you hate it, I'll set you up in any apartment you want, cover your expenses, and I'll back off. But give me a chance to prove we're family. Emma signed something, tugging on Violet's sleeve to get her attention. Will you read to me? Such a simple question. Such a normal thing for a child to ask. And Violet felt her carefully constructed walls start to crumble. Every night, if you want. She signed back. Emma's smile could have towered the entire city. She grabbed Violet's hand with complete trust, and Violet felt tears burn behind her eyes. She looked at Victor. I keep working at the shop. I need something that's mine. With security. He wasn't asking. Fine, with security. She took a breath. And you tell me the truth. About what you really do. About why you have armed guards. About all of it. In time. His jaw was set. When I'm sure you won't run. That's not fair. Neither is asking you to trust someone you just met. He moved closer. But I'm asking anyway. Give me 3 weeks to show you what family means. Violet looked at Emma still holding her hand. At Owen standing quietly by the door. At Victor watching her with 18 years of searching written across his face. She thought about her empty apartment, her unpaid bills, her pink eviction notice. She thought about being alone. 3 weeks, she agreed, finally. But I reserve the right to leave whenever I want. Agreed. The relief in his voice was palpable. Emma signed something that made Victor actually smile, and when Violet looked questioning, he translated. She says she's going to show you her room and her rabbit collection. Violet felt herself smile back despite everything. I'd like that. The mansion sat behind iron gates at the end of a private drive, lined with trees that probably cost more than most cars. Violet pressed her face to the SUV window as they approached, watching the house emerge from the dusk like something from a magazine she'd never be able to afford. Semi stories of pale stone and massive windows, with columns flanking the entrance and gardens that looked professionally maintained. The kind of place she'd cleaned in her early 20s, scrubbing toilets for people who never learned her name. Now, apparently, she was related to someone who owned one. Emma sat beside her in the back seat, still holding her hand like she was afraid Violet might vanish. She'd barely let go since the flower shop, signing constant questions that Violet answered as best she could with her limited ASL. Victor drove with Owen in the passenger seat, both men quiet but alert in a way that suggested they were always watching for threats. The SUV stopped in front of the entrance. Victor came around to open Violet's door before she could reach for the handle herself, a gesture that felt both protective and slightly suffocating. Welcome home, he said simply. Home. The word felt foreign in her mouth. She'd lived in 17 different places since aging out of foster care, none of them home. Just temporary stops between one disaster and the next. Emma tongued her toward the front door, practically vibrating with excitement. The interior was exactly what Violet expected. Marble floors, high ceilings, a chandelier that probably required a ladder to clean. Everything was tasteful and expensive and completely overwhelming. A woman in her 50s appeared from a side hallway, gray hair pulled into a neat bun, wearing casual clothes that somehow still looked professional. Emma released Violet's hand long enough to run and hug the woman's legs. Mrs. Patterson, Victor explained. She helps manage the house and stays with Emma when I'm working. The woman smiled warmly at Violet. You must be the sister we've been hearing about. I'm Anne. Welcome. Thank you. Violet felt awkward, out of place in her worn jeans and sneakers on the pristine marble. I hope I'm not causing any trouble. Nonsense. Anne's smile widened. Victor hasn't stopped talking about finding you for 3 years. It's lovely to finally meet you. Victor's ears went slightly red, which was humanizing enough to make Violet almost smile. Emma grabbed her hand again and started pulling her toward the staircase. Your room is on the 2nd floor, Victor said, following them. Next to Emma's. I thought you might want to be close, but if you'd prefer more privacy. Next to Emma is fine. Violet looked down at the little girl beaming up at her. I think someone wants to show me her rabbit collection anyway. Emma's enthusiastic nodding needed no translation. The 2nd floor hallway was wide enough to drive a car through, with doors lining both sides and artwork that looked original hanging on the walls. Emma pulled her to a door near the end, pushing it open to reveal a bedroom that made Violet's breath catch. It was easily 3 times the size of her studio apartment. A massive bed with a thick comforter sat against one wall, flanked by nightstands with actual lamps. A dresser, a full-length mirror, a desk by the window. The attached bathroom, visible through an open door, had a tub big enough to swim in. This is, Violet started, then couldn't finish. Too much. It was too much. If you don't like it, we can change anything. Victor hovered in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed to enter. The furniture, the colors, whatever you want. No, it's... She turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. It's perfect. I just don't understand why. Because you're family. He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. And family takes care of each other. Emma tugged her sleeve, signing that her room was right next door. And did Violet want to see the rabbits now? Yes, Violet signed back. Show me everything. The next hour passed in a blur of stuffed animals and children's books, and Emma's animated explanations for sign language about each rabbit's name and personality. Mr. Buttons was the oldest and wisest. Daisy was adventurous. Cotton was shy, but very kind. Violet sat on Emma's bedroom floor, surrounded by plush toys, and felt something tight in her chest start to loosen. When was the last time someone had wanted to share something with her this enthusiastically? When was the last time she'd felt wanted at all? Victor appeared in the doorway as Emma was introducing rabbit number 12. Dinner's ready, if you're hungry. The dining room table could have seated 20 people easily. But they sat at one end, the trio. Them clustered together like they were trying to take up less space. Anne had prepared something that involved chicken and vegetables and herbs Violet couldn't name, served on plates that were probably worth more than her car. She ate slowly, hyper-aware her table manners, trying not to feel like an imposter. Emma sat beside her, eating with one hand and signing comments about her day with the other. Victor watched them both with an expression Violet couldn't quite read. You're good with her, he said quietly. The signing. Most people don't bother to learn. I worked at a community center for a few months when I was 22. We had several deaf clients. It seemed important. Violet paused. She's wonderful, by the way. Emma, you've done an amazing job with her. Something painful crossed his face. Her mother deserves most of the credit. He chose his words carefully, not as present as I should have been. Work demands a lot. There was a story there, buried under the careful words. Violet wondered what kind of work required armed guards and black SUVs and the resources to buy multiple buildings on the chance a lost sister might show up. She was about to ask when Emma signed something that made Victor tense. He signed back, but Emma persisted, her small face determined. She wants to know if you're staying forever. Victor translated reluctantly. I told her we agreed on 3 weeks to start, but he paused. She's hoping for longer. Violet looked at the little girl watching her with desperate hope and felt her heart crack a little more. I'm not going anywhere right now, she signed carefully. I promise. Emma seemed satisfied with that, returning to her dinner with a small smile. But Violet caught Victor's expression, saw the way he was looking at her like she'd just given him something invaluable. After dinner, Emma insisted on showing Violet the library, which turned out to be an entire room lined floor to ceiling with books. Then the garden, visible through large windows even in the darkness. Then Emma, Victor finally intervened gently. Violet's had a very long day. Maybe let her rest? But Emma's face fell so completely that Violet found herself saying, "One bedtime story? If that's okay?" Emma's expression transformed instantly back to pure joy. She grabbed Violet's hand and practically dragged her upstairs. Victor following at a distance with something that might have been amusement on his face. Emma's room was exactly what a 7-year-old's room should be, full of color and toys and drawings taped to the walls. She climbed into bed and pulled out 3 books, making Violet choose. They were all about animals, and Violet selected one about a rabbit who was afraid of the dark. She sat on the edge of Emma's bed and began reading aloud, signing key words as she went. Emma snuggled into her pillow, gray eyes fixed on Violet's face with absolute attention. Halfway through, Violet noticed Victor standing in the doorway. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, looking more human than he had all day. Their eyes met over Emma's head, and something passed between them. Understanding. Maybe, or the beginning of trust. When the story ended, Emma was fighting sleep, her eyes dripping but determined to stay open. Violet set the book aside and pulled the blanket up to Emma's chin. "Good night, sweetheart," she signed. Emma's small hand caught hers. She signed something that Violet didn't catch, looking to Victor for translation. His voice was rough when he spoke. "She said she's glad you came home." Violet felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. "Me too," she signed, meaning it more than she'd expected. Emma's eyes finally closed, her breathing evening out into sleep. Violet stood carefully and followed Victor into the hallway, pulling the door almost closed behind them. They stood in the quiet hallway, neither quite sure what to say. Finally, Victor broke the silence. "Thank you for being patient with her, for trying. She's easy to love." The words came out before Violet could stop them, and she felt her face heat. "I mean, she's a great kid. She is." He paused, then, "You should know what you said at dinner about not going anywhere. She's going to hold you to that." "I meant it." Violet met his eyes. For 3 weeks, at least. Something flickered in his expression. What would it take to make it longer? The question was too heavy for the quiet hallway, for the end of an impossible day. Violet didn't have an answer. So she said instead, "Tell me something true. About you, about all this. One real thing." Victor studied her for a long moment. Then he moved to a window overlooking the front gates and the darkness beyond. "I've done things I'm not proud of." His voice was low, controlled, built something that requires making choices most people would judge. "But every decision I've made for 18 years has been aimed at one goal, finding you and making sure you were safe." He turned back to face her. "So here's something true. I don't care what it costs or who I have to go through. No one will ever hurt you again. Not Claudia Westbrook, not anyone. Because you're mine to protect now. And I don't fail twice." The intensity in his voice should have been frightening. Maybe it was. But it was also the first time in Violet's life that someone had looked at her and said, "Mine," like it meant something absolute. "I don't need protecting," she said, but it sounded weak even to her own ears. "Maybe not." His slight smile held no humor. "But you're getting it anyway." He walked past her toward the stairs, pausing at the top. "Your room has a lock on the inside. Use it if it makes you feel safer. And if you need anything, my room is at the end of the hall." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the stairs, leaving Violet alone in the quiet hallway of a mansion that belonged to the brother she'd forgotten. She went to her room and closed the door, leaning against it as she took in the space that was apparently hers now. The bed that was too soft, the bathroom that was too large, the closet that was completely empty, because she owned exactly 3 outfits worth keeping. Violet walked to the window and looked out at the gardens below, at the gates in the distance, keeping the world out. Or keeping her in. She wasn't sure which yet. 3 weeks, she whispered to her reflection. She could survive 3 weeks of anything. But as she climbed into the impossibly comfortable bed and pulled the thick comforter around herself, she couldn't shake the feeling that 3 weeks wasn't going to be enough. For Emma, who'd looked at her with such hope. For Victor, who'd spent 18 years searching. Or for herself, who was just beginning to realize how lonely she'd been. The first week passed in a surreal haze of routine that felt borrowed from someone else's life. Violet woke each morning in a bed that didn't creak, showered in a bathroom with endless hot water, and ate breakfast prep, aired by someone who wasn't her. Emma appeared at her door every morning at 6:30 without fail, wanting help picking flowers from the garden before school. Victor watched them from his office window. Violet could feel his gaze even when she couldn't see him, a constant presence that was both comforting and unnerving. She still went to the flower shop every day, driven by one of Victor's men in an SUV that felt ridiculous, parked outside her modest storefront. 2 guards remained nearby at all times, discreet but visible enough that customers noticed and whispered. Business actually improved. Apparently being associated with Victor Hayes, whoever he really was, carried weight in the city. The second week, Violet started finding things in her room. New clothes in her size, appearing in the closet without explanation. Toiletries she'd mentioned needing once in passing. Books she'd looked at online, suddenly sitting on her nightstand. It should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like being seen for the first time in her life. Emma's vocabulary expanded daily, teaching Violet new signs over dinner each night. Victor joined them when he could, though he often received calls that made his expression go hard and distant. He'd excuse himself with an apology, disappearing into his office for hours. Violet tried not to wonder what kind of business required that much intensity at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. The breakthrough came 2 weeks in when she found the wall. She'd gotten turned around in the mansion's maze of hallways, looking for the library Emma had mentioned. Instead, she opened a door that led to what looked like Victor's private office. She should have closed it immediately, respected his privacy. But the wall stopped her. One entire section was covered in photographs, documents, maps, string connecting various points like something from a crime show. And in the center, dozens of pictures of a little girl with auburn hair at different ages. School photos, surveillance images, candid shots taken from a distance. Her, at 8 years old, 12, 15, 18, 23. Violet stepped closer, her heart hammering. There were notes in Victor's handwriting beside each photo. Placement with the Morrison family, lasted 6 months. Moved to the Chen household, lasted 14 months. Aged out of system, last known address. 18 years of her life, documented and tracked. 18 years of him searching, while she'd believed she was completely alone. She didn't hear him enter behind her. Didn't know he was there until his voice spoke quietly from the doorway. I should have asked before keeping those. Violet spun around, caught. Victor stood with his jacket off, tie loosened, looking exhausted in a way she hadn't seen before. You really never stopped. Her voice came out rough. All this time, you were looking, every single day. He moved into the room but kept his distance. After our parents died, before they separated us, I promised you I'd find you. Do you remember? She shook her head. I remember someone promising something, but I was so young, the details are gone. March 14th, your 6th birthday. They were moving you to a different facility the next morning. He spoke like he was seeing it happen in real time. You were crying because they wouldn't let you bring your stuffed bear. I told you I'd keep it safe until I found you. That we'd be together again, no matter how long it took. Violet's throat went tight. Did you keep it safe? He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out something small and worn. A brown teddy bear with one eye missing and stuffing coming out of one arm. She recognized it instantly, a flash of memory so vivid it hurt. She took it with trembling hands. You kept this for 20 years? I kept my promise. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. It took me longer than it should have, but I kept it. She clutched the bear to her chest, feeling something break open inside her. 20 years. He'd carried this ratty stuffed animal for 20 years because he'd promised a 6-year-old he'd keep it safe. Why didn't you tell me? She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face now. 2 weeks I've been here, and you didn't mention any of this. Because I was afraid. The admission seemed to cost him. If you knew how obsessive I'd been, how much I'd watched you from a distance, you'd think I was insane. You'd leave. I might have. She wiped at her face with her free hand. This is a lot, Victor. I know. He stayed where he was, not trying to close the distance. But it's the truth. You wanted something real, something true. This is it. You've been my mission for 18 years. Finding you, protecting you, making sure you were okay even when you didn't know I existed. That's not normal. No. A slight smile touched his face. It's not. But we're family, Violet, and I don't give up on family. She looked at the wall again, at the evidence of his dedication. It should have terrified her. Maybe it did, a little. But mostly it made her realize she'd never been as alone as she'd thought. They were interrupted by Owen appearing in the doorway, his expression tense. "We have a situation." Victor's entire demeanor shifted, the vulnerability disappearing behind cold professionalism. "What kind?" Owen glanced at Violet, clearly uncomfortable. "Maybe we should discuss this privately." "She's family." Victor's voice went hard. "She stays." Owen hesitated, then nodded. "Robert Westbrook has been making moves. Asking questions about your sister. Our sources say he's planning something. Likely retaliation for the incident with his wife. The incident where Claudia had slapped her. Violet had almost forgotten about it in the surreal comfort of the past 2 weeks. Almost. What kind of retaliation? Victor's voice dropped to something dangerous. Unknown. But he's pulled resources, called in favors. Whatever he's planning, it's significant. Increase security on the shop. Victor's mind was clearly working through scenarios. And here. Double the perimeter guards. Already done. Owen's gaze flicked to Violet again. But you should know. He's specifically asking about her schedule, where she goes, when she's vulnerable. The words sent ice down Violet's spine. He's targeting me? Victor moved then, crossing the room to stand in front of her. No one is targeting you. Because you're not going to be vulnerable. I'm not hiding, she said immediately. I have a life, a shop to run. With appropriate security. His tone left no room for argument. Until Westbrook backs off or is handled. You don't go anywhere without Owen or me personally. Handled. Violet caught the word. What does that mean exactly? The look he gave her was answer enough. She stepped back, shaking her head. No. You're not doing something illegal because a woman slapped me. She's not the threat anymore. Her husband is. And he doesn't make empty threats. So what, I'm supposed to just accept that you're going to, what, hurt him? Kill him? She couldn't keep the fear from her voice. That's not who I want you to be. It's who I am. The words were quiet, but absolute. I tried to shelter you from it, but you wanted truth. So here it is. I run an organization that operates outside the law. I have for 16 years. It's how I got the resources to find you, and it's why people like Westbrook know not to cross me. Violet felt the room tilt slightly. An organization, not a security firm. Something else entirely. You're a criminal. I'm your brother. His eyes never left hers, and I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe, even if you hate me for it. Before she could respond, Anne appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Emma's missing. The words sucked all the air from the room. Victor went completely still, and Violet watched something terrifying slide across his features. What do you mean missing? She was in her room 10 minutes ago, doing homework. I went to start dinner, and when I checked on her, she was gone. The window's open. Victor was moving before Anne finished speaking, taking the stairs 3 at a time. Violet ran after him, her heart in her throat. Owen was already on his phone, barking orders in a clipped tone that suggested this was a practiced emergency protocol. Emma's room looked exactly as it had that morning, except for the window standing open and curtains moving in the evening breeze. Victor went straight to it. Looking down at the garden below, where a trellis offered an easy climb. She didn't run away, he said, his voice deadly calm. Someone took her. How do you know? Violet moved beside him, looking at the disturbing absence of a little girl who should have been safe. Because Emma is terrified of heights. She wouldn't climb out a second-story window voluntarily. He turned to Owen. Pull the security footage. Now. They moved to Victor's office, where he pulled up multiple camera feeds on a large monitor. Violet watched as he scrolled through the footage, his hands completely steady despite the tension radiating from his body. There, Owen pointed. The screen showed the garden at 5:47 p.m., just 13 minutes ago. A man in dark clothes appeared from the tree line beyond the fence, moving quickly to the trellis. He climbed up, disappeared into Emma's window, and emerged 2 minutes later, carrying a small, struggling figure. Emma. Violet watched her niece fight against her captor, saw her mouth open in what must have been a scream no one heard. The man carried her back over the fence and into the trees, disappearing from view. The room went absolutely silent. Then Victor moved, his control shattering like glass. He swept everything off his desk with one violent motion, papers and pens and a lamp crashing to the floor. His breathing was ragged, hands clenched into fists. Violet had never seen anyone look so dangerous. Owen. Victor's voice was barely recognizable. Find out where Westbrook is. Right now. Already tracking. Owen was typing rapidly on a tablet. His phone pinged twice in the last 10 minutes. Cell towers put him at a warehouse in the industrial district. That's where she is. Victor straightened, his expression going cold and empty. That's where they took her. We don't know that for certain, Owen started. Yes, we do. Victor was already moving, grabbing a jacket from behind the door. Because Westbrook's an idiot who thinks taking my daughter will make me back down. Violet followed him into the hallway. I'm coming with you. No, he didn't even look at her. You're staying here where it's safe. She's my niece too. Violet grabbed his arm, forcing him to stop. I'm not sitting here doing nothing. Their eyes met. And she saw something she'd never seen before. Fear. Real, absolute terror buried under layers of rage. If something happens to you, his voice cracked slightly. I can't lose both of you. You won't. She didn't know where the certainty came from. But you're not going alone. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then he nodded once, sharp. Stay close to Owen. Do exactly what he says. And if things go wrong, you run. Understood? Understood. They moved toward the garage where multiple vehicles waited. Victor opened a cabinet that revealed enough weapons to supply a small army, selecting items with practiced efficiency. Violet watched her brother, the man who'd kept a teddy bear for 20 years, transform into someone she didn't recognize, someone capable of violence she couldn't imagine. And she realized with startling clarity that she didn't care what he had to do. She just wanted Emma back. The warehouse district sat on the edge of the city like a collection of abandoned teeth, industrial buildings crumbling into disrepair under flickering streetlights that barely pushed back the darkness. Victor's convoy of 3 SUVs moved without headlights, silent predators approaching their prey. Violet sat in the back seat beside Owen, watching her brother in the front passenger seat. He hadn't spoken since they left the mansion 15 minutes ago, his profile carved from stone as he stared ahead. He'd changed into tactical gear, black from head to toe, and the gun holstered at his side looked like a natural extension of his body. This wasn't the man who'd kept a teddy bear for 20 years. This was someone else entirely. Target building is 300 yards ahead, the driver reported quietly. Thermal imaging shows approximately 8 heat signatures inside. One small, likely the girl. Emma. Her name is Emma. Victor's voice was flat, emotionless. What about exits? 3 visible. Front entrance, side door, loading dock and back. Unknown if there are others. Owen leaned forward. I've got 15 men positioned around the perimeter. Your call on approach. Victor was quiet for a moment, and Violet watched his hands flex against his knees. Then he spoke, each word carefully controlled. Owen takes 10 men through the front. Make noise, draw attention. I go in the back with the rest, quick and quiet. And her? Owen nodded toward Violet. She stays in the vehicle with Harris. Victor still hadn't looked at her. Doors locked, engine running. Anything goes wrong, Harris drives her straight home. Violet opened her mouth to argue, but Owen caught her eye and shook his head slightly. Not now, his expression said. Let him focus. The SUVs stopped 2 blocks from the target building, parking in the shadow of a defunct factory. Men emerged from the vehicles like shadows, armed and moving with the kind of coordination that spoke of extensive training. This wasn't a rescue operation. It was a military strike. Victor finally turned to look at Violet, and his eyes were empty in a way that made her chest hurt. If I don't come back. You're coming back, she interrupted. You promised Emma you'd protect her, so do it. Something flickered in his expression, there and gone. Then he was out of the vehicle, moving with lethal grace toward the warehouse. Owen squeezed her shoulder once before following, and then she was alone with the driver, Harris, watching through the windshield as the men disappeared into the darkness. The waiting was worse than anything. Violet counted her heartbeats, watching the digital clock on the dashboard tick forward with agonizing slowness. 2 minutes. 3. 4. Then gunfire shattered the silence. The sound came from the front of the warehouse, sharp cracks that echoed between the buildings. Harris tensed but didn't move, his hands steady on the wheel. More gunfire, sustained this time, and Violet realized it was cover for Victor's team entering from the back. She pressed her face closer to the window, trying to see anything through the darkness. Her hands were shaking. Emma was in there, terrified and alone, probably not understanding why the world had suddenly turned violent around her. "Please," Violet whispered to no one. "Please, let her be okay." The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it started, leaving ringing silence. Harris's radio crackled to life. "Package located," Victor's voice, still emotionless. "Moving to extraction point." Relief flooded through Violet so intensely she felt dizzy. Harris allowed himself a small smile. "She's alive." But the radio crackled again, different voice this time. "We've got a problem. Westbrook has a gun on the girl. Wants to negotiate." Harris's smile disappeared. His hand moved to his own weapon as he listened to the rapid exchange of information through his earpiece. Violet could only catch fragments, but each word made her stomach drop further. Hostage situation. Demands safe passage. Threatening to shoot. Victor requesting clearance to engage. "No," Violet breathed. "No, no, no." Then a sound that would haunt her nightmares. A single gunshot, loud even through the closed vehicle and distance. The radio went silent. Violet's hand was on the door handle before she could think, but Harris caught her arm. "Ma'am, don't. We don't know." Another voice cut through the radio. "Package secure. Threat neutralized. The girl is safe." Owen's voice, calm and professional, but Violet heard something underneath it. Something that told her the cost of that safety. Harris released her arm and started the engine, driving slowly toward the warehouse. They pulled up to the loading dock, where men were emerging, some helping others who were injured, all of them moving with the efficient aftermath of violence. Then Victor appeared, carrying Emma. The little girl was wrapped around him like a vine, face buried in his neck, her small body shaking with silent sobs. Victor's tactical gear was splattered with blood, though Violet couldn't tell if it was his or someone else's. His face was still that terrible blank mask, but his arms around Emma were infinitely gentle. Violet was out of the SUV before it fully stopped, running toward them. "Emma, is she hurt?" "She's okay." Victor's voice was hoarse now, the emotion he'd been suppressing starting to crack through. "Scared, but okay." Emma lifted her head at Violet's voice, and her tear-streaked face crumpled further. She reached out with one arm, the universal gesture of a child wanting comfort, and Violet took her from Victor without hesitation. The little girl was trembling violently, her fingers digging into Violet's shoulders hard enough to hurt. Violet held her tight and felt her own tears start to fall. "I've got you, sweetheart. You're safe now." Owen appeared beside them, a cut above his eyebrow bleeding freely. "We need to move. Police will be here in less than 10 minutes. Victor nodded, then seemed to notice Owen's injury for the first time. "You're hit." "It's nothing." Owen wiped blood from his eye. "Westbrook? Dead." The word was flat, final. Along with 4 of his men, the rest ran. Violet looked up sharply, still holding Emma. "You killed him. He had a gun to my daughter's head." Victor met her eyes, and she saw something raw there. "What would you have had me do?" She didn't have an answer. Couldn't reconcile the violence she knew had just occurred, with the little girl shaking in her arms, who was alive because of it. They loaded into the SUVs quickly, Emma refusing to let go of Violet, even as they buckled into the back seat. Victor sat up front again, and Violet watched his hands shake as he pulled off his tactical gloves. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the adrenaline was crashing, leaving behind whatever he'd been holding back. The drive home was silent, except for Emma's occasional hiccuping sobs. Violet stroked her hair and whispered reassurances. The same meaningless comforts she remembered receiving as a child when the world felt too big and scary. When they finally pulled through the mansion gates, Anne was waiting on the front steps, her face pale but composed. She rushed forward as they emerged from the vehicles, reaching for Emma. But Emma shook her head violently and clung tighter to Violet, making small distressed sounds. "It's okay," Violet told Anne softly. "I've got her." They went upstairs together, the 3 of them, to Emma's room that still had the window standing open from her abduction. Victor closed and locked it with more force than necessary, while Violet sat on the bed with Emma in her lap. The little girl's hands started moving, signing something Violet couldn't follow through her shaking. Victor knelt in front of them, his voice gentle for the first time since they'd left. "She's asking if you're going to leave now." His own hands were still trembling. "Now that you've seen what we are." Violet looked down at Emma's tear-stained face, at the terror and hope warring in her gray eyes. Then she looked at Victor, at the blood on his clothes and the absolute devastation barely contained behind his controlled exterior. "I'm not going anywhere," she signed to Emma, making sure the little girl could see her hands clearly. "I promised, remember? I keep my promises." Emma's face crumpled again, but this time with relief. She buried her face in Violet's shoulder and finally started to calm. Victor stood abruptly and moved toward the door. "I should clean up." "Victor." Violet's voice stopped him. "Thank you for bringing her home." He didn't turn around, but his shoulders tensed. "I'm sorry you had to see that side of me." "I'm not." The words surprised even her. "You saved her life. That's all that matters." He did turn then, and the look on his face was so broken that Violet's heart ached. "I failed her once. When her mother died, I wasn't there. I swore I'd never fail her again. And you didn't." Violet held his gaze. "You kept her safe. You both came home. That's not failure." Something in his expression shifted, the mask cracking further. "I killed a man tonight. 5 men. I know." Violet's voice was steady, despite the trembling in her hands. "And Emma is alive because of it. So whatever judgment you're waiting for from me, you're not getting it." They stared at each other across the room, the weight of the night settling between them. Then Emma drifted in Violet's arms, signing something that made Victor's composure finally shatter. "What did she say?" Violet asked quietly. "She said," his voice broke completely, "she said she's glad we're all home. Together." He crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped his arms around both of them, careful not to get blood on Violet, but unable to stop himself from touching Emma's hair. His shoulders shook with silent sobs he'd been holding back since the moment he'd realized his daughter was gone. Violet held them both, one hand on Emma's back and the other reaching up to grip Victor's arm. A family cobbled together from loss and violence and desperate promises kept. "We're okay," she whispered. "All of us, we're okay." And in that moment, surrounded by the evidence of the worst night of their lives, Violet realized she meant it. They were broken and bloodied, and probably damaged in ways that would take years to unpack. But they were together, and that was enough. 6 months later, Violet woke to sunlight streaming through curtains she'd chosen herself, in a room that had stopped feeling borrowed and started feeling like home. The clock read 6:28, which meant she had exactly 2 minutes before Emma appeared at her door, wanting to pick flowers before school. She smiled and stretched, already reaching for the comfortable clothes that had replaced her worn jeans and oversized sweaters. Designer labels still felt excessive, but Victor had pointed out that she could afford them now. The flower shop had expanded into 3 locations, each one thriving under her management and Victor's financial backing. The door opened right on schedule. Emma peeked in, already dressed for school. Her long black hair in the braids Violet had learned to do perfectly over the past months. She signed good morning, then asked if they had time for the garden. "Always," Violet signed back. "Let me get my shoes." They walked downstairs together, Emma's hand in hers like it belonged there. The mansion felt different now, less like a museum and more like an actual home. Violet had added her own touches, fresh flowers in every room, photographs on the mantel. Emma's artwork displayed in frames along the hallway. Victor sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper, a cup of coffee steaming beside him. He'd shaved the night before, and his hair was still damp from a shower, making him look younger than his 34 years. He glanced up as they entered, and something soft crossed his expression. "Morning," he said simply. "Morning," Violet returned, moving to pour herself coffee. "Emma's already planning which flowers to pick." "Of course she is." There was amusement in his voice now, the kind of gentle humor that had emerged slowly over the months as he'd relaxed into the reality that his family was safe and staying. Emma signed something that made Victor laugh, an actual laugh that Violet had learned was rare and precious. He signed back, then translated for Violet's benefit, even though her ASL had improved dramatically. She wants to know if you'll help with her homework later. Something about fractions. Violet groaned dramatically, making Emma giggle silently. Math? You know I'm terrible at math. Which is why she's asking you instead of me. Victor's slight smile widened. Character building. For who? Me or her? Yes. They headed to the garden, Emma running ahead to the flower beds that Violet had expanded and redesigned. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of roses and lavender and earth. Emma moved between the plants with careful precision, selecting blooms for the arrangement they'd create together. Violet watched her and felt the now familiar tightness in her chest that came from overwhelming gratitude. 6 months ago she'd been alone, struggling to survive, convinced she'd never have a family. Now she had a niece who looked at her with complete trust and a brother who'd built his entire world around keeping them safe. The cost of that safety still kept her awake sometimes. She knew what Victor did, the organization he ran, the violence he was capable of. She'd seen it firsthand that terrible night. But she'd also seen him cry while holding his daughter, seen him keep a teddy bear for 20 years, seen him look at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever made. People were complicated. Family was complicated. And she'd learned to accept both truths. Emma brought her an armful of flowers, white roses, purple iris, yellow daisies. They arranged them together on the garden bench, Emma's small hands placing each stem exactly where Violet suggested. The little girl had gotten good at this, had started asking questions about running a flower shop when she grew up. The thought of Emma at 18, confident and happy and choosing her own path, made Violet's heart swell. They brought the arrangement inside and placed it on the dining room table where Anne was setting out breakfast. The older woman had become something like a grandmother figure, worn and steady and completely unslappable, even when she had to clean blood from tactical gear. Beautiful work, Anne commented, admiring the flowers. You two make quite the team. Emma beamed and signed that she and Violet were the best team. After breakfast, Victor drove Emma to school in one of the less conspicuous vehicles, though Violet knew there were still guards who followed at a distance. Some precautions never went away. She used the time to go through orders for the flower shops, coordinating deliveries and special requests from her home office that Victor had set up for her. The business had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. What had started as a struggling single storefront was now a legitimate enterprise. And Violet had discovered she was good at managing growth. Victor had offered advice but never pushed, letting her make her own decisions and mistakes. Around 10, Owen appeared at her office door. He'd become something like a friend over the months, the protective older brother she'd never asked for but appreciated anyway. The cut above his eyebrow from that night had healed into a thin scar he wore without self-consciousness. Got a minute? He asked. Always. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. What's up? He sat, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I wanted to talk to you about something. About Victor. Violet set down her pen, giving him her full attention. Is he okay? He's better than I've seen him in years, Owen said honestly. Since you and Emma came into his life, he's been lighter somehow, like he can finally breathe. That sounds like a good thing. It is. Owen leaned forward. But I want you to understand what you did for him, what finding you meant. She waited, sensing this was important. Victor's wife, Emma's mother, she died because of his work, an enemy trying to get to him. He blamed himself, shut down emotionally except where Emma was concerned. For 2 years I watched him function on autopilot. Just going through the motions. Then he found you. Violet's throat tightened. Owen didn't talk about this kind of thing often. He told me once that finding you was the only thing that kept him from becoming someone he'd hate. That knowing you were out there somewhere gave him a reason to be better than the violence his work required. Owen's expression was serious. So thank you for coming home, for staying even after you saw the worst of what we are. I didn't have a choice. Violet said softly, This is my family. Where else would I go? Owen smiled. That's exactly what he needed to hear. After he left, Violet sat thinking about the strange path that had led her here. A customer slap, a mysterious property owner, a brother she'd forgotten. 6 months that had changed everything. That evening, Emma had a school event, a showcase where students presented projects they'd worked on all semester. Emma had created a presentation about flowers and their meanings, complete with drawings and actual pressed blooms that Violet had helped her prepare. They sat in the small auditorium, Violet on one side of Emma and Victor on the other, watching as their little girl stood in front of her class and signed her way through the presentation. A teacher translated for the other students, but Emma's enthusiasm needed no translation. "She's amazing," Violet whispered to Victor. "She gets that from you." He didn't look away from Emma. The confidence, the joy in teaching people about something she loves. "That's all you." Violet felt tears prick her eyes. "She gets the determination from you, a refusal to give up." His hand found hers between their seats and squeezed once. "We make a good team." "Yeah," Violet agreed, squeezing back. "We do." After the showcase, they took Emma for ice cream, sitting at a small table in a shop that stayed open late. Emma got chocolate with sprinkles and ate it with the focused intensity of a 7-year-old who'd been promised dessert. 2 of Victor's men sat at a nearby table, discreet but present. Violet had stopped noticing the guards weeks ago. They were just part of life now, like the mansion and the expensive clothes and the brother who'd killed to protect them. Emma signed something between bites of ice cream, and Victor translated. "She wants to know if you're happy here, with us." Violet looked at Emma's earnest face, then at Victor, watching her with barely concealed hope. 6 months ago she'd agreed to 3 weeks. She'd stayed because leaving felt impossible, because Emma needed her, because Victor looked at her like she was something precious he'd thought he'd lost forever. But somewhere along the way, staying had stopped being about obligation and started being about choice. "I'm happier than I've ever been," she signed directly to Emma. "This is where I belong." Emma's smile could have powered the city. She signed something else, quicker, and Victor's expression went soft. "She says she loves you," he translated quietly. Violet reached across the table and took Emma's small hand. "I love you too, sweetheart. So much." When they got home, Emma was asleep in the back seat, ice cream and excitement having worn her out completely. Victor carried her upstairs while Violet followed, and they went through the now familiar routine of getting her into pajamas and tucking her in. Emma barely stirred, trusting them completely. They stood in the hallway after closing her door, the house quiet around them. Victor looked exhausted, but peaceful, the ever-present tension in his shoulders finally released. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For staying, for loving her, for making this feel like a real family instead of just people living in the same house." Violet smiled. "You don't have to keep thanking me. I'm not going anywhere." "I know, but I'm going to keep saying it anyway." He paused, then, "I have something for you. Been waiting for the right moment." He led her downstairs to his office, pulling out an envelope from his desk drawer. Inside were legal documents that took her a moment to understand. Then the words clicked into place. "You're signing over the flower shops? To me? They're already yours in every way that matters. This just makes it official." He watched her face carefully. "Full ownership, no strings attached. You built something beautiful, Violet. It should be completely yours." She stared at the papers, at her name written in legal terms that meant independence and security and trust. "Victor, this is too much. It's not enough." His voice was firm. "You gave up your entire life to come here, to be part of this family. The least I can do is make sure you have something that's entirely your own. Something that can't be taken away." The weight of it hit her then. Not just the shops, but what they represented. Victor giving her the freedom to leave if she wanted to. The means to survive on her own. The choice to stay because she wanted to, rather than because she needed to. It was the most generous thing anyone had ever done for her. She set the papers down and hugged him, feeling him tense in surprise before his arms came around her. They'd gotten more comfortable with physical affection over the months, but it still felt significant, important. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for never giving up on finding me." His arms tightened. "Thank you for being worth finding." They stood like that for a long moment, 2 people who'd lost each other and found their way back against impossible odds. Outside, The security lights illuminated the gardens where Emma would want to pick flowers in the morning. Upstairs, a little girl slept safely in her bed, dreaming of ice cream and flower meanings. And in that quiet moment, Violet finally understood what home meant. Not a place, but the people who refused to let you face the world alone. The family that found you in the darkness and brought you into the light. She pulled back and smiled at her brother. So same time tomorrow? Garden at 6:30? Victor smiled back, the genuine one he saved for family. Wouldn't miss it. Later, in her room, Violet looked out the window at the grounds below. 6 months. It felt like a lifetime and no time at all. She thought about the woman who'd slapped her in a flower shop, unknowingly setting in motion a chain of events that had led her here. She should probably send a thank you card. The thought made her laugh, and she climbed into bed feeling lighter than she had in years. Tomorrow, Emma would want flowers and help with fractions. Victor would drink too much coffee and pretend he wasn't checking security feeds compulsively. Anne would make breakfast and offer grandmotherly wisdom. And Violet would be exactly where she belonged, home, with her family, building a life she'd never dared to dream was possible. She fell asleep smiling, the worn teddy bear Victor had kept for 20 years sitting on her nightstand, a reminder that some promises were worth keeping, no matter how long they took to fulfill.